Another way that we can create objects in JavaScript is by using a constructor function. This is a special function that we call with the new keyword. This is also a design pattern. We call it the constructor pattern. And it looks like this. We use the function keyword followed by the name of our function, and our name begins with an uppercase letter. This is to distinguish a constructor function from other normal functions. And then comes the parameter list. A constructor doesn't have to have any parameters, but if you need to supply information to a constructor, then you can have parameters. For example, I'm creating a constructor function for creating person objects. There are two pieces of information that we need in order to create a person object. We need the first name and the last name, and it makes sense to make those as arguments for our constructor. Inside of a constructor, we use the this keyword to refer to the object that we are creating. So if we wanted to create a first name property, we would use the this keyword followed by a dot and then first name. But we could also use some of the other ways of creating properties. We could use the bracket syntax if we wanted to, or we could also use the object.define property and object.define properties method. But most of the time, we just simply want to create our property and assign it a value. Let's do the same thing for last name, and we will assign that the value of our last name parameter. Let's create a method. Now, technically, we don't have methods in JavaScript. We have a property that contains a function object, but logically, we have a method. Now, whenever I'm referring to methods, I will try to stick with the term method, but I might slip every once in a while and say property. So I'll just go ahead and apologize beforehand. Now the method that I'm going to create is called sayName. I'm going to set it to a function, and this function is going to return a string that says my name is, and then it's going to concatenate this.firstName followed by a space, and then this.lastName. And this is a basic constructor, and some people, myself included, would say that we created a person data type. Not only because we use this constructor function to create person objects, but we can use the instance of operator to determine if an object is an instance of person. So let's create a couple of person objects. Let's first create one called John Doe. So let's new up person. For the first name, we want John. The last name is Doe. And then let's create one called Jane Doe, which follows the same pattern as John Doe, except we will use Jane instead of John. And then let's create a variable called isPerson, and we will use John Doe instance of person, and this will be true. And of course, if we used instance of in conjunction with an object that was not a person object, then it would be false. So for all intents and purposes, we created our own custom data type. Now there's a slight problem with this basic constructor pattern, and it is our sayName method. Because for every person object that we create a new function object and assign it to same name. So for example, let's create a variable called isSame, and then we could test if johndoe.sayName equals janedoe.sayName. Now we are comparing the actual function objects. We are not comparing the result of executing those methods. And this would be false because johndoe.sayName is a completely different function object than janedoe.sayName. And this actually results in increased memory usage because we have to create these extra function objects and store them in memory. But that's not the only issue. We can also run into inheritance issues by defining our methods inside of the constructor. So instead, we can define our methods on the prototype. Every function object has a property called prototype, but it's really only used for constructor functions. Any property that you define on the prototype is shared between all instances of that constructor function. So for example, by creating John Doe and Jane Doe, they both now have access to the same sayName method. So this isSame comparison is now true. And this becomes very important with inheritance. There are many different ways that you can implement inheritance in JavaScript, and we will start looking at that in the next lesson.